Welcome to A Pint with Seaniebee, coming to you from outside in a beautiful park in Acton Town in London. And the reason we're doing it outside is that I've got a very, very interesting guest today. ATM is a street artist who goes around painting birds on buildings. And for those of you listening, I mean the feathered variety. And he's been doing this for 5 years. It is a form of activism to draw attention to the diminishing population and extinction of many of the indigenous birds to Britain. And we're going to hear all about why he does this. I'm welcoming to the podcast ATM. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you.
So tell me why you started painting birds on buildings. Let's start there.
Well, I've always been interested in street art as a means of communication. So before I actually started painting the birds, I was doing anti-war graffiti, using house paint and text, and also using stencils as kind of ways to subvert advertising in a way and draw attention to other subjects that weren't dealt with properly in the mainstream media. So, and also the idea of street art to bring art out of galleries so that it's part of the fabric of our environment. So, you know, so many people don't go to art galleries, and art galleries can be extremely elitist. I always like the idea of painting outside. Historically, there's like weather constraints about Britain, you know, like in Italy and places in Spain, you know, a lot of the art was outside the buildings.
Yeah.
Modern painting materials, they're really hard. They're really hard wearing. So there's no reason why there shouldn't be a lot more art on the outside of buildings in this country. And the second point with the birds is that the environmental crisis now is getting so extreme. You know, I've always loved nature and cared about nature, and it's getting so extreme now that I just thought I have to try and do something about it to make people think about it.
One of the things that I like about the art is the difference between graffiti and bona fide, really stylish street art. Your bird pictures, and again, anyone who's listening now could do worse than actually clicking on and having a look at some of the artworks, because they really are beautiful. This idea that graffiti spoils the view and ruins buildings and all this kind of stuff, and in your case it absolutely doesn't. In fact, in my view, it enhances them. Where do you stand on that whole graffiti thing?
When I started on this estate, it was the South Acton estate, the huge, sprawling, pretty grim, you know, aesthetically grim looking, no nice colours anywhere. And I've always thought, why do we like greys and browns so much in this country? You know, it costs the same amount for lime green or orange paint as it does for these boring flat colours. So I started just painting the wall a flat colour just to give it some colour, and then paint the subject on that. Everybody appreciated it when I first started painting on this estate. They thought, wow, you know, it's something nice to look at. It kind of improves. Well, it just improves the area. And one Somali fella said to me, because I painted a snipe there, and it was a really nice comment, and he said, oh, my son will never get into trouble if he's standing by a painting of a giant snipe. And it's like,
how interesting.
It just supports that view that to a large extent our environment does affect our behaviour, and if you live in a brutalised, grim environment, it's more likely to produce antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, give people pride in their community and pride in the area they live in.
What's wrong with it? You know, why not more bright colours? So it's twofold. It's talking about the subject, that painting, and the barn owl and the grey partridge that I painted on the same block was on Bollow Bridge Road, and the River Bollow used to flow here, and you know there would have been marshy meadows when this was farming, like, you know, farmland on the edge of London, basically, little small villages. And so I wanted to draw attention to the fact that we're losing all that, and that process is continuing on a drastic scale, to the extent that some of these once common birds could well become extinct in this country.
So, I mean, one of the ones I read up about was the passenger pigeon fiasco, which was at late 1800s, early 1900s, New York, America, where they went from being the most common bird in America to extinct, I think, in a period of maybe 20-25 years, or maybe less, I don't know. How endangered is the bird life in Britain at the moment?
Well, it's serious. I mean, I just read something that on the Isle of Shetland, the seabird colonies have totally crashed this year. I think it was last year or recently. There were 18,000 pairs of Arctic terns, and this year there are 100. And they're not just terns, puffins and everything. The food's gone.
Overfished.
Yeah, overfished. And maybe it's got something to do with climate change as well, which, a lot of the fish can't live in warmer waters, so they move. A lot of things are moving north. Insect species that used to, until recently, only found on the continent, they're now being found in southern England.
Right.
So,
mosquitoes and stuff are starting to become more prevalent.
Yeah, different species of dragonflies, bees, all sorts of things that move. But there's a limit to how far you can go, that's the trouble.
And we don't hear about it. It's like almost as if, it's just a bird, what?
Well, exactly. That's a tragedy. And there's a lot of mainstream media does talk in those terms, like people like Jeremy Clarkson, say, so what? These
Jeremy
things go.
Clarkson,
he's got this column in the Sun.
He's a tit.
He is. No, it's the biggest kind of imbecile in Britain. But he's got a voice, and people want to be his mate. They think he's great. In one of his pieces, he actually said, in so many words, who gives a fuck if orangutans become extinct for palm oil plantations? Because food for my daughter is more important than an orangutan. He actually said that in so many words, and I thought, how stupid, because he's looking at it from the point of view, it's either human survival, food supplies, or animal survival. Right. Whereas I'm looking at it from the point of view that this mass extinction and destruction of habitats is ultimately going to affect human survival. So it's like a warning sign. And the fact, that lots of people are saying there's hardly any swallows and swifts this year. Where are they all gone? There's no insects. It's catastrophic.
And the bee situation is also still dangerous, right? I mean, the bee colonies are collapsing everywhere as well.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, there's multiple disasters going on. Yeah, to see it as, we can make the choice between human survival, so that human expansion and populations and consumption, basically, of environments can just carry on indefinitely without hitting an absolute disaster point. We're living our lives, and it's possible to live your life without giving it a second thought, because it seems
it's not my problem.
Well, it just seems like it's not a problem. The way human beings are, we're very good at responding to immediate threats that we can see or smell or feel. But these kind of abstract threats where people are saying this is going to happen unless we change, well, we're not good at processing that, and so it's very easy just to live, for all of us, just to live our daily lives, with our daily problems and concerns and all the rest of it, and not to consider that.
Well, if we all woke up in the morning tomorrow and every single bird was gone, we'd freak out. But it's a bit like the melting ice. If it's a slow progress over a decade, and we just don't notice it, and there's just some people making a big fuss over nothing, and that's and we do that about everything. It's called we're technology. We're going to be run by robot overlords probably before we know it. But it's a creeping thing.
Yeah, George Monbiot came up with this phrase for that, like shifting baseline syndrome. That each generation considers what is normal in terms of numbers of birds or whatever, whereas a few generations ago, what was not, I remember talking to an ex-girlfriend's grandfather, and he was talking about butterflies in the 1930s in this country, and like in fields there'd be clouds.
I remember
of them.
growing up.
There'd be everywhere.
You chase them and catch them and nets and stuff.
Yeah, there were literally thousands of them. And now you see an individual, if you're lucky, you see one at a time.
Every summer, Red admirals and all those.
The odd one. Yeah. So children born now, to them that's normal, seeing an occasional butterfly. And if they don't see any butterfly, then they don't miss it, because they don't know it ever existed. But
what is killing the birds?
It's like industrialisation of farming, basically, in the countryside. Pesticides, herbicides. I just went on a train trip to Lowestoft on the Suffolk coast to see a nature reserve, like this Carlton Marshes Nature Reserve. The Suffolk Wildlife Trust have just got funding to buy quite a lot more land in that area to join up these little reserves. So they're going to it's going to be about 1,000 acres altogether. And it was just so beautiful. There was cattle grazing in there. It was just so beautiful to see. It was kind of teeming with life, bird life and insects, and it was just a beautiful environment. But on the train getting there, it's like this green wasteland of, they've got rid of all the hedges. There's no field margins anymore. You've got vast, like prairie-style fields with one species, just the food, and so everything else is eliminated with insecticides, pesticides, and fertilisers, which are bad for the wildflowers. And so we've just lost. So it was beautiful to go to that place, but incredibly sad to see what's been destroyed. Like since the Second World War, 97% of our wildflowers have gone. In this country.
Really?
So along with that goes all the insects and the birds, and it's accelerating now. Now with all the building programs, in London, these big new estates, and usually paying lip service to anything natural. It's just about making money.
Well, I'm conscious as well, only because of what I'm talking about to you, that we've chosen to sit in the park, which is, I don't know, it's a 4 or 5 acre park, and it's surrounded by trees, and it's just 1:30 in the afternoon, and I can't hear many birds.
No.
And I would expect to hear lots. I can see one just flying over, but all I can hear in the headphones is the background noise of building and commerce and development. But we're actually in a park, and I can't hear any birds tweeting.
Well, exactly. I mean, this place should be full of sparrows, for example.
Yeah.
But there aren't any sparrows, and so it's not just industrial farming in the countryside. That's the problem in the countryside.
Yeah.
But in the cities, hedgehogs are disappearing catastrophically. They could become extinct.
Yeah.
And they eat, slugs and snails and
Worms and stuff.
and that, and so the removal of front gardens to paving them for parking spaces. So it's cars. It's also overusing pesticides in gardens. Aphid sprays and slug pellets. All these things, which kill
Food for a bigger.
food for the birds, food for everything. So it's a knock-on effect of multiple causes.
What's the positive, optimistic look on trying to tackle this? Like I read somewhere, like in America, they're putting gardens on roofs again, which seems like a no-brainer. Why didn't anyone think of it before? Where you can actually create, I'm not sure it's probably like putting a band-aid on an open wound, but at least there's some greenery and stuff like that.
It does often feel like kind of desperate attempts to minimise the damage, but there are positive things. I just did a painting of a sparrowhawk. It was a Friends of the Earth, it is a Friends of the Earth project to regreen one street by getting all the community involved. They were putting planters on window ledges, installing nest boxes, planting little trees and wildflowers around existing trees and things like that, just to regreen the street. And it's really positive, and it's the idea. They did a crowdfunder to fund a community gardener to actually look after the stuff and make sure it flourishes, and the idea was that as a template that can be done in any town or city. And so so there are serious efforts being made to reverse, but it's all about trying to reverse the major trends, which are all about getting rid of
but I can even hear the guy, like you can imagine in the planning department of some government big block building with no windows, and there's one guy who's trying to peep up, perk up and say, what about the hedgehogs? And everyone would just look at him going, what are you talking about?
Exactly.
It's not cool, it's not progress, it's not development, it's not all the things that they're doing, it's not concrete. It's sad. Were you always interested in birds? How did you get interested in wildlife? And you're from the north of England, right?
Yeah, from the northwest near Manchester. I grew up in a town called Rochdale. It's part of the Greater Manchester conurbation, but the interesting thing about that part of the world is it's where the Industrial Revolution basically started. The landscape, like the topography, means that where I grew up, there's within walking distance, there's steep river valleys, and with old remains of mills and old brick chimneys and stuff. At the bottom, because they used water power to power water wheels, but that's never been built on because it's so steep. So you've got all the housing estates on the flat land at the top. When I go back there now, a lot of these river valleys, they've not changed since I was a kid, whereas the flatlands have completely changed. The open fields and all the ponds and the little streams.
So you grew up, were you a working class family background, or?
Yeah, more lower middle class. Yeah.
But you were able to run around and you experience habitats and experience environments and streams and wildlife from an early age, which we made the point earlier, just doesn't happen today for kids either, right?
Well, that's good about the north of England. There's that mix. There's a mix of real dense building, but then there's open fields. I mean, there was horses being grazed. Not from near where I went to school, and I went to a few different schools, but they were all kind of. The south of England is much denser. That somehow it doesn't give that opportunity for the two things to coexist, but that being said, I mean, when I was growing up in the north, there were kestrels everywhere. I remember lapwings everywhere, and all these things now. The biggest shock, is in my lifetime they've become rare. They're often only now found on nature reserves.
So were you a bird watcher, an ornithologist, or whatever the word is?
Yeah, I just love birds. I don't know. I always love birds. I don't know.
Would you go out like spotting them though?
Yeah, but I was going out to the places as well, because the places where the bird lives are the interesting places to explore. The woods and the rivers and the moorlands. So it's not just the birds; it's the atmosphere. It's a gorgeous environment, all the reeds and all the trees and the wildflowers and everything. So it's a nice place to be, and that's where lots of different birds live. So the two go together, really.
Well, we're similar vintage, but I can remember like running around and not being. People didn't worry about kids being out poking dead foxes and sticks with the you'd come across them. And so, what about school, college? Were you always interested in art, or how were you at school? Did you enjoy your schooling life and whatnot? I know you have a good story about university and how you got pissed off at one university. And
I can't say I enjoyed school. I mean, I had some good mates at school and we had a laugh, but the actual being in school, I mean, my strongest memory of school is literally looking at the clock and staring out the window, just desperate to get out of there. I was lucky that I had an art teacher who was really sympathetic to me. He introduced me to the drawings of Leonardo da Vinci and Albrecht Dürer. He was saying, copy these, try and draw like that. And so that was so good, because modern art teaching kind of abhors copying, as a way to learn, but it's the traditional way that artists always learn. So that was all right. And
so you were always channeling yourself then towards going to art school?
Yeah, I mean, my parents didn't want me to go to art school.
What did they want you to do?
They wanted me to get a kind of proper job.
Yeah, work in a bank or something.
Well, they said, use your artistic ability to become an architect. That would be a way to do it. And I've often been tempted to do other things throughout my life. I nearly became a musician, but it was always art was the strongest pull. And the same with throughout my life doing something else, even though it would have made my life easier financially and all the rest of it. But I just couldn't, when it came to the crunch, I couldn't do it. So.
Well, it's very rare that I come across people who've been so brave, because it is a very brave thing to do, because everyone will tell you it's hard to make a crust, and you have to dedicate yourself to it in a way that, there's no guarantee of success, and parents roll their eyes when people say they want to be artists from a young age, and it's a great achievement to stick with it, because I'm sure all around you when you were a teenager, early 20s, people say, what are you doing? You're not going to get any money from that.
No, I got mocked. I mean, the art school that you're talking about, because I went to Rochdale Art College I did a foundation year. That was really good. There's some real maverick tutors there. They were really open-minded. It was really great. It was the best. I didn't know it at the time, but that was my best experience of art college. And then I went to Cheltenham, which where they had a vision of what painting should be. It was like going back to school. The first year we had to do all these painting exercise, And I thought I was going to art college to kind of explore my own ideas and get support. And it seemed like they just they called me naive because I liked Renaissance painting. Yeah. They had this vision, and anyway, so I had a war with them, and I eventually got.
Did you walk out?
No, I got evicted. Yeah, I got chipped out
for being difficult.
Well, technically, I got chipped out for non-attendance. The first instance was before I started at college. I'd agreed to do an exhibition in Manchester, and I asked the college for permission for like 2 weeks to go set up this exhibition. They just said flatly no, I couldn't do it. So then I had the choice of. They had this weird idea that art. You mustn't think.
You're not ready.
Well, you're not in. You weren't expected to think in terms of the real world for some bizarre reason. You were thinking about art and to function as an artist was not part of the curriculum. After college. Anyway, I went anyway and did it, but that counted against me. And then I refused to do these painting exercises. And I was painting at home, and right at the end of the year, they'd made an appointment for me to bring in all my paintings to show to the head, to show what I'd done. But they just set me up because I physically carried all these paintings, staggered up the road with all these paintings, and the head wasn't there. There was nobody there at the end of the year, and so there was nobody ever saw the paintings that I'd done. one of the tutors who I was at most at odds with actually said to me, he called me a fool, and he said, you can count on the fingers of one hand the number of artists who make a living out of their art in this country. And I was like 18, and he said that to me. And
thanks for the inspiration.
It's total bullshit anyway.
Yeah, it is bullshit.
Yeah, it's bullshit, but it's such a kind of underhand way to try and undermine somebody.
Yeah, it's exactly what teaching shouldn't be.
And then it was the summer holidays, and then I just got this letter saying I'd been evicted.
So then you went to Sheffield, right?
Yeah, and
things got better.
Well, I had a mate at Rochdale who knew the head of painting at Sheffield, so he got me an interview, and it was funny when I went. After I went for the interview, got accepted, the 3 staff who were interviewing me, they were looking at me really quizzically because they couldn't kind of make me out, because apparently Cheltenham had written them a letter which was so damning of me that they tried to sabotage my future. I mean, they wouldn't tell me what had been said, but they kind of couldn't believe that I was quite reasonable person.
That's awful, isn't it?
Yeah. So I don't know to this day.
And so in Sheffield, you got back on track, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty cool there. I mean, they basically let me do my own thing and left me to my own devices, which was good. So I spent a lot of time in the library, and I was learning about ancient painting techniques. I was really interested in the whole Renaissance thing of how to construct a painting, layer by layer and glazes, and which caused me so much trouble at Cheltenham, because they didn't like that at all. So I was allowed to kind of follow that.
So talk to me about your activism then. How did you get involved in sort of the activist movement, and what sort of stuff did you do there?
Just sheer frustration with the political status quo, and particularly remember the invasion of Afghanistan and then the wars in Iraq. And I was just so horrified at the lies and the bullshit, the blatant lies and the manipulation by politicians. I mean, it's going on now, of course, obviously, with all this anti-Russia stuff. It's so extremely, transparently idiotic, a lot of it. So I just felt the need to say what I felt, because it's like, I can't stand hearing this, And so, I was doing anti-war stuff. Yeah, we worked together.
And do you feel it works? Because, I mean, there's, here's a little sideline. I mean, I spent my career dirtying myself in advertising, as we talked about earlier, but I looked at your work and I was going, were you ever tempted to put copy on them? I love the fact that there's no copy on them, but the barn owl, the endanger, you're actually allowing people to find out what it's about rather than...
Yeah, that's very interesting, because a lot of conservationists and other people I've spoken to have asked me that question, say, why is there no information? Why people are more likely to do something if they know what it is. But other people have said the opposite. They said, no, the power of it is in the fact that it's just the image.
I agree with that.
As soon as,
I do agree with that, yeah.
And as soon as you start putting text on things, it becomes, it kind of diminishes it. It becomes another kind of advertising.
Exactly. But I mean, what would be nice if anyone from the council, I mean, maybe you would disagree with this, but if there was a plinth nearby that spoke about the barn owl and its habitat and why it's being damaged, or somewhere within spitting distance of your artwork, that might give some sort of level of community, but not on the thing. Do you feel still that?
Yeah, I mean, that has been done a few times.
Okay.
Because I've done something with the RSPB, and they did that, describing, I did a stone curlew. And
do you feel that breaks your purity, or you're cool with that?
No, I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
And the one that I just showed you, the kestrel,
beautiful,
and the wildflower meadow up on the emergency housing, the containers. We're going to put a sign there explaining what it is and why we've done the subject. Yeah.
The other thing about your work is it's extremely detailed. It takes about 2 or 3 days for you to actually put a piece up. I'm assuming the cops, that you don't have to evade the cops. Do they let you away with stuff, or because it's so beautiful, or how do you work around the graffiti laws such as they are?
Well, I mean, the walls that I'm doing these big bird paintings on, I've got permission. Sometimes I'm getting paid, sometimes not, but I've got permission. I mean, 3 days in the daylight painting. It would be hard to get away with it otherwise.
Yeah.
But the other stuff, I did it in the middle of the night.
So online people can purchase your art that's on canvas. And is that the same style of work that you do? Do you do mainly wildlife pieces like that are in smaller versions?
Yeah, I do. I do get commissions for small canvases, and I've got a shop on Big Cartel, ATM Street Art. So,
where do you stand on Banksy? Are you a fan, or?
Oh yeah, I was always a fan. From the early days, I was always a fan of Banksy. I just think, I just like his wit, and he's very clever, and he dealt with a lot of important subjects in a good way. So I think he's really good. But I mean, and I remember I went to his first ever exhibition in a gallery, and someone had sprayed "sell out" on the window.
I remember,
and
probably him.
Yeah, maybe, and
it's the sort of thing he'd do.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like there's whole degrees of Puritanism within the street art and graffiti world, like to proper graffiti artists who paint in subway trains in the middle of the night. Street art is absolutely pathetic nonsense, with permission and all that. But I think it's got a role to play. Like it's public art really more than.
Well, what I like about what before we turned on here, you were talking about how your stuff does get tagged occasionally, but they tend to respect the core image of the bird, which is nice.
Yes, I mean, there's that idea that youth who tag or graffiti, it's like kind of is the idea that it's mindless vandalism, but it's not, because they will tag horrible, boring, empty spaces to say something or put their mark on there, and where they respect other people's work. So
well, I mean, I had a big discussion with Dotmaster, who was a guest on the show, about this very issue, and I actually reference Rome as the place where I just noticed where you've got buildings that are thousands of years old, and there's just these inane, badly done tags on them. And of course he's totally defensive that, oh no, it's all good. And I'm like kind of going, if I wrote a book that was absolutely shit and I forced it down people's throat, of course you have to draw the line between when does it stop being shit, right?
Yeah.
But he's a real believer that everyone should be allowed to do anything on anything, and the more profane and the more kind of adulterated you make it, the better, good on you, and all this kind of stuff, which is I get that. But do you have a view on that?
I tend to think, I've not seen the stuff in Rome particularly, so I don't know that. But in this country, there's just not enough, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
There's just such a wealth of horrible, boring building, which could do with anything, any bit of colour or something to break it up. So I tend to agree with Dotmaster really that anything's better than nothing.
Moving away from art and graffiti and street and public art, what's your view on because I can feel that you're a guy who thinks so deeply about what's going on in the world. We've talked about the environment, and I read somewhere that you believe that we're possibly in the middle of another great extinction, which we've had 3 or 4 already in the history of the planet by all accounts. What's your view on where the world is going at the moment? Are you pessimistic or optimistic?
I kind of vary, At the moment, I'm deeply pessimistic. I've just been aware of too many horrible facts about how fast things are disappearing. I just went to a talk about Madagascar, for example, where the human population has risen by 50% in 15 years.
Wow.
So it's gone from 18 million to it's now 27 million. It's a terribly poor nation. It's subsistence farming and mostly rice, but they use slash and burn.
It's got so many original animals.
They chop down the forest, they burn it so it's fertile for 3 years to grow the rice, and then they move on. There's a small percentage of the original forest left. I mean, once that's gone, it's going to be like Easter Island, where there's nothing. There'll be nothing to sustain the population, and so it's that horrible situation. Like, I know organisations are working to try and use more kind of permaculture techniques and stuff like that, and that's one example though of things changing so fast. And of course, every individual, they have to feed themselves, they have to feed their family, and the only firewood is a tree, so you chop it down to feed your family. But once it's gone, then
so it's a micro example of what's happening,
the same thing's happening in this country, but it's less obviously dramatic. But the natural structure of the country is just being destroyed to fulfill human needs, and it's going to end in a disaster for human beings as well. But no, politicians don't want to talk about it. They really don't. They want to talk about the immediate pressing needs of the economy and people's wages, and which is totally understandable. But the background destruction, nobody's really trying to find a solution to it. And I I do feel
And
pessimistic.
it is very much lone voices. I was talking about Hedgehog Guy earlier, blowing, shouting into the wind, and people just not really that interested. What would you say to your younger self if you had a chance to go back to when you were in school, whisper in his ear? Would you give any different advice now for looking back from here?
That's interesting. I've not thought of that before. That's interesting. But no, to be honest, I wouldn't actually, because I have, through all the all the difficulties, I have stuck to what I wanted to do. Often to my own detriment. Living in horrendous housing and stuff.
Yeah.
But I have stayed with what I wanted to do. And like you said earlier, it's an artistic career is completely unpredictable. There's no way of knowing how it's going to turn out. So it's like a leap of faith. You do it because you want to do it. But looking back, I wouldn't have done things differently.
Okay, that's great to hear. And lastly, what would you say to a person who's 18 now and thinking of going into art school?
Well, considering you have to borrow...
Don't go to Cheltenham.
Don't know, maybe it's brilliant
maybe
now.
It's better now, I'm joking. Sorry, Cheltenham, if you're listening.
I don't think it's worth getting hugely in debt to go to art college now, because from what I've heard as well, it's atrocious. You don't even have a permanent studio space. Mm-hmm. You've got might have a little desk that you have to share with other people. So the advantage of being in an art college used to be you had a space.
Yeah.
So they don't even get that now. And also, I don't know how true these things are, but they might. We used to get tutorials as well, and we had some interesting lectures, but I think students sometimes hardly ever see their tutors, or might just communicate with email. So the university system has become a business. They get away with the minimum for maximum profit, basically.
I agree with you. I think you waste years in college. Filmmaking, anything that's creative.
Yeah, anything
go and
creative.
Fucking do it, because you can find out. The internet shows you everything you want to know.
Exactly,
and you can learn more from the internet than you can from the teacher.
If you're doing something academic where you need qualifications, so the sciences or mathematics or something like that, probably it's worth going to university if you've got good tutors. It's worth it, because there are ways to learn, much harder to learn by yourself. It depends also what kind of art you want to do, because the tradition of teaching art from drawing, life drawing or whatever, or drawing the visible world, or drawing from the old masters and all that, which when I was at college completely gone. It was ludicrous. When we're 18 or 19, we were told we had to be original, come up with new styles.
Well, you have to know what you're not doing, right?
Yeah, and
you have to know the basics of what things like, chiaroscuro, whatever the word is, like the light and shade and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, you have to. If it depends if you want to do representational painting, figurative art or whatever, it's a good idea that you learn those things. But the other problem with art colleges is the tutors mostly are not equipped to teach those things, because they don't know how to do it themselves. So when I was at college, I learned how to draw, not from the tutors, but from copying, great artists from the past who could really draw. That's the way to learn. You don't need to go to art college, but I agree with what you said earlier, that if you're doing something creative, the main thing you want to do is you need experience in that field. So
get cracking.
If you want to be a street artist, try and connect.
There's the street. Here's a
there's
can of
the
paint.
Street. So you can start doing it, and you can just make contact with other artists. All the street artists I know, if a young person came up to them and said, "Oh, can we
learn from you?"
or be like be an apprentice or help out, or, most of them would say yes, and I would, and I do. I kind of offer help, whatever help. So, and then you learn by doing it, and then you probably make better connections that way than you do if you're in a college. So I think, and you don't want to be in debt all your life. So I think if you want to be an artist, you kind of know what you want to do, just do it and try and make contact with people who are doing similar stuff and can give you a help.
Excellent. The artist is ATM. The website is attached to the blurb of the podcast. I normally close my show, by the way, with the Stop the Pigeon theme tune music, and I have an idea here that we're just going to say nothing for the next 60 seconds to play out, listening to the ambient sound of a park in the centre of London, where I'm astounded in the afternoon at the lack of birds. Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thanks very much.
those still listening, maybe someday the birds will be back.